Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "A good leader inspires people to have confidence in the leader. A great leader inspires people to have confidence in themselves." Well, on today's episode, we're going to talk about inspiring and infuriating leaders, 3 insights about leadership, and more broadly about human nature, the leader amplification effect, its impact, and how to solve it, the power of reflection, and more. My guest is a husband to Jen, a proud father to Aiden and Asher, and a surprise twin. He's a celebrated social psychologist, the Paul Colello Professor of Leadership and Ethics, and a Vice Dean at Columbia Business School. He's been studying, researching, and teaching about leadership for over 2 decades. His TED Talk, How to Speak Up for Yourself, is one of the most popular of all times and has been viewed more than 7.6 million times. He co-authored the best-selling book, Friend and Foe, and his latest book, Inspire, weaves together his decades of research and global consulting experience to reveal the science of how to become more inspiring. He's been featured in popular media outlets including NPR, Fox Business, Forbes, GQ, the New York Times, and many others. Please welcome the man who is inspiring all of us to be more inspiring, Dr. Adam Galinsky. Adam, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Jay, for having me, and thank you for that incredibly gracious and inspiring introduction.
It is my pleasure, and I am so thrilled about today's conversation. I know this is going to be a great one, so let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point would be for you to share with all of us maybe a memorable or a profound experience from your past that defines and makes up who you are today.
I think it's a great question. I would probably say 2 of them popped into mind. One of them is my favorite memory of my life, and that is being held in the ocean by my dad. And so it was this incredible feeling of adventure and security at the same time, risk and comfort, right? That I felt so safe and protected in his arms, but the waves were crashing all around. And it's this thrilling, exhilarating experience. And I remember when my father passed away, we put his ashes in the ocean. And I was with my brother and my sister, and I mentioned this was probably my favorite memory of my life. And they were both like, that's our favorite memory too. So we all had this experience of our dad as sort of being this inspiring, protective figure. And, your introductory quote from Eleanor Roosevelt, the idea of like inspiring, faith in you, but also in yourself. And I think, our dad gave us, he protected us, to in order to the point where we could be independent, right? So, the idea of nurturance to independence rather than, denial of nurturance as a form of independence. The second one I would probably say is, I am a surprise twin, as you mentioned. And I think one of the fascinating things about twins is that, this old finding that twins reared apart are often more similar than twins reared together. And that seems sort of very surprising because you're like, well, they have, identical twins. So they have the same exact genetic code and the same environment. But one thing that twins do is they also really start to differentiate from each other, right? So it's like we both like basketball, but maybe I'll start liking baseball because my brother's a little better than me at basketball. And so I think that's one of the profound things for me is sort of how my brother and I kind of like diverged in some ways, and with some of the same underlying tendencies. So he's a documentary filmmaker, I'm a researcher, and so I think when something fascinating happens in the world, he will say to himself, "Oh, that would make a great movie," and I would say, "Oh, that would make a great study," right? And so we're still sort of looking at the world, we're creatively engaging with it, but we sort of differentiated ourselves along, I guess, the artistic and intellectual track. And so he developed all the music and photography and filmmaking skills, and I developed, I guess, the research and the writing skills.
First of all, thank you for sharing. What two fantastic experiences and memories to cull from. So a couple of things, because I want to stay on your father for just a moment. But before I go there, in terms of your brother growing up as twins, was there competition amongst the two of you? And
Absolutely.
Is there still competition today?
Probably not really as much today, but there absolutely was, and I think that I think a defining two different things about with my brother, which I think are particularly fascinating. One is in third grade, he got into the gifted, talented program and I didn't. And then in sixth grade, he got in, there was a new IQ test that everyone was given to determine whether you got into like the junior high school, middle school. And he got into the program and again, I didn't. And this time my parents asked if they could have me retake the test. And the school district said, yes, you just have to hire a psychologist to give it in person. And apparently I did really well in that. And I think one of the things about who I am as a human being is I'm a very social person. And so like I did really well when I was interacting with someone, and I don't do really, when I'm isolated by myself on like one of these tests, I'm not really as engaged. And so I think that also clarified a little bit about, and I remember a Psych 1 class in college where the professor saying, intelligence is malleable, and we know this because some people do much better when the test is given in person than on paper. And I was like, that's me, and then I also think, doing, my brother, we both were runners, and I really loved running at one point, went to long distance running camp. But like, I still remember I was 12 years old and I ran a 10K race in 46 minutes.
Wow.
But my brother ran it in 42. And so eventually I just stopped running because I could never beat him. I ended up being a wrestler for 4 years. But again, that idea of differentiation and sort of finding, and so, my brother did better on IQ tests. He did better on races. And so I found other ways to to have an impact, I guess.
That's amazing. A quick story that I've not really shared on this podcast before, but when I was young, I was chosen to participate in the Talented and Gifted program. But prior to that, I had very little self-esteem and very little value on myself. I always stayed as hidden and as small as I possibly could. And I had one teacher, just one, who saw something in me that, number one, I didn't see in myself, that others didn't acknowledge or notice. And when she brought that to my attention and recommended me for this program, it radically changed my life. It changed my perception. It changed who I believed that I was. And it gave me hope and confidence for a better future for me. It was quite amazing.
I mean, that in some ways is literally the core of the book, right? What it means to inspire someone, right? And one of the things that, I call them, that person was your encourager, right? And I always ask people, like, who's the person in your life that believed in you, that saw potential in you before you saw it in yourself? And it could be someone when you're in elementary school. It could be a recent boss, right, who said you should try out for this role, which you didn't know that you had the talents or capabilities to fulfill, and how powerful that encourager is. And so I don't know if this person is still with us or you're still in contact with them, but I always, when I teach, is I ask people to reach out to their encourager, and I say, let them know the impact that you had. Because this is a key part of understanding what it means to inspire people, but also why we infuriate people, is that humans have a core set of fundamental needs that we need to be filled. And one of the reasons why there's a certain selection of dimensions of inspiring others is because each one of those, there's 3 universal dimensions, which I'll talk about, because they each satisfy a fundamental human need. And one of the most profound fundamental human needs is for meaning and purpose. And there's nothing more meaningful and purposeful than knowing that you positively impacted someone someone's life. And I actually reached out to one of the people from grad school, and I feature him in the book. But in 2010, I just reached out to him and said, I just want to say you positively impacted me in 3 different ways. And I listed the 3 ways. And I said, I wouldn't be here today without you. And he wrote back, like, that might be the nicest gift I've ever received, right? You never know if you have an impact. So for anyone out there listening, if there's someone in your life that impacted you through their encouragement, they saw something in you before you saw it in yourself, they saw some seeds or embers of potential that were able to be ignited, reach out to that person and let them know the positive impact. It will fill their heart with gold.
That is so true. I absolutely love that. And thanks to you just reinforcing that message through your book, I try to do that daily, right? Keeping my eyes open, recognizing when I see something in someone else and acknowledging it either in the moment, which I would prefer to do if I can do that in person, or in writing, but being very specific, I think, to your point, right,
Yep.
where you listed 3 things that made such an impact, because I think that's where it really lands and resonates, because it's very specific as opposed to saying, you really inspire me, or, you did an outstanding job today. So, yeah, that's awesome.
I want to come back to that one
Yeah.
point, though. You said,
Sure.
I prefer to do it in the moment in person versus in writing. I actually think that sometimes, in many cases, there's a benefit to writing it, and hear me out. So oftentimes when you compliment someone in the moment, it's a little embarrassing. So you can see that people kind of like, oh, well, thanks, and so it's, it feels sort of good, but also a little awkward. And so someone pointed this out to me, and it was a president of an organization who would do this daily over his cup of coffee. He would reach out to people, and he said, I do this, and I'm specific, and I compliment, say, hey, you really knocked that presentation out of the park last week. I was just thinking how great it was. Or, that paragraph you gave me really helped me sell something to the board, which I couldn't have done without you. So I just wanted to say thank you. He said, I started doing that because I wanted to put a skip in their step. But what I realized is by writing it, I get a skip in my step because they reply with an effusiveness they wouldn't do in person. Right? In person, they're kind of like push it away, but they're like, thank you so much. That means so much to me. But he said something that one of them told him something, said, I really appreciate getting this in writing. And the person said, because I get to savor them. I can actually go back, like you sent me this compliment about my presentation last week. I actually, Sunday morning, I got up and read that again. It just made me feel so good. And I forwarded it to my mom, and my mom got to read it. And so sometimes, like maybe do it in the moment and then follow up and sort of reiterate it. But there's a savoring benefit, there's a sharing benefit, and then there's the replying benefit that you get when they reply to you. And it feels good to reply back to say, oh, thank you so much. That means so much to me. And so many people hide from compliments. I love compliments and I hate them at the same time.
Right.
And
Me too.
So I think that there's a surprising benefit in letting people receive it in writing. And I think that's why you don't want to do bad news in writing, because then people will read it and they'll get even more infuriated by it, right? And so it's sort of the ironicness, right? The thing that you want to not do in person is the better thing to do in person, and the thing you want to do in person is sometimes better in writing.
That's first of all, thank you for pushing back on me on that one, because I think that makes a very powerful point and a great argument for doing it in writing. And for all of you that are watching and listening right now, I hope you heard that as well. Most importantly, acknowledge the thing that you see, right? Be that type of inspirational person who is looking for the good, that's looking for somebody who's making a difference, and letting them know about it. But to Adam's point, do it in writing.
Yeah,
So
and just as another one, one of the things my mom was always so good at growing up was that if she got excellent customer service, she would actually write to that person's boss, and just say, I just wanted to say, I had excellent service from this person, and my it's ironic because my wife Jen, and they're so kind of you to mention her name earlier. She does that too. Like we had this thing we had to get copied, and she wrote this long note to the person's boss at the copy center about how great they were and helped us, meet our needs and stuff like that. And so, I joke maybe that's what drew me to my wife, was that she has the same really gracious tendency. But you mentioned the leader amplification effect, and I sort of call that, amplifying your amplifications, right? Like when you're in a position of authority or leadership where people look up to you and you compliment them, it's really powerful and positive. Now, if you criticize them, it's, very destructive and it comes across as humiliating, right? But a compliment becomes glorious, right? When it comes from a leader. And then you can even extend that gloriousness by, like praising the person, not only to them, but to their boss.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk certainly more about that. And I will just tell you right off the bat that I have made my share of mistakes there, where something came out of my mouth where I wasn't thinking, and
Yes.
I said something negative versus positive. And I quite honestly, I really wrestle with that because I regret it, right? It creates a tremendous amount of pain for me. And then I try to figure out how do I own it? And then how do I apologize, and how do I work to make that right? And we'll talk more about that here shortly. But I do want to go back to your dad for a moment, as well as your mom, since you brought her up. So both of your parents are now deceased. As you think back, and you shared a wonderful memory about your father, what is one of the most valuable lessons that you did take away from both your father and your mother? If you'll start with your mom, one of the most valuable lessons, and then let's talk about your dad as well.
Yeah, I think, again, my mom was just a very thoughtful person. And I remember, I was in my 30s and I was visiting home, and it was after my dad had passed away, and we were going to their favorite restaurant, and we had a reservation. It was a hard place to get into. And, I was like feeling a little anxiety about getting there on time and didn't want to lose the reservation. And my mom was like, she was taking a long time. And we finally got in the car, and I was like, what? She's like, oh, I just had to get something. And then she had remembered that the one of the waiters had just had a baby. And so she was putting together like a present to bring to the waiter to like say, oh, I know she just had a baby and here's this thing, and she'd even called earlier to make sure that he was working that day. So, he didn't end up serving us, because we were put into one table and it wasn't his station. But like, that was just a level of thoughtfulness. And I already mentioned her thoughtfulness of like reaching out to a person's boss to let them, know what a great job they had done. And she was sort of, very, very, very good at that. I think for my dad, my dad's greatest strength was he just was a non-defensive person. You could criticize him and say something he did hurt you, and he would listen, and he wouldn't get defensive, and he would say you're right, and he would talk to you about how he might do it better, and try to understand the implications of his words. And he didn't always do a good job of correcting himself. One of the big themes of this book, and bringing up my parents really highlights this, is there is this universal continuum between being inspiring and infuriating. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the thing that is all of us out there, Jay, you, me, others, we have both our infuriating and our inspiring tendencies and characteristics, right? And so, for my mom, was so thoughtful, was so generous, but she was also beset by anxiety. And I found that anxiety sometimes corrosive, like, I wanted to escape her anxiety, and so she had both this, she shared her good self and also her anxiety with us. And my dad, was so non-defensive and so, could see the big picture. But he had these periodic bouts of just, unmitigated rage. And it's a cliche, but I still remember to this day when I was like, I don't know, I could have been 8, 10, 12, somewhere in that age. And I spilled literally milk at the dinner table. My dad just flipped out screaming and yelled, like, the whole idea of like yelling over spilled milk. He literally did that, And so, I think, over time, he did a much better job of containing his anger and becoming more inspiring, over time. And I think those are just examples of, the world's a complicated place, and none of us are perfect. And I think, but we can always strive. The inspiring thing that we can do is always to strive to be more inspiring tomorrow than we were today.
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, as I was researching and doing my due diligence in preparation for our conversation, I did some research on your dad, and I read some comments about him after his passing, and obviously his impact was tremendous and was felt far and wide, and the words that were used were just so touching, so meaningful, and obviously quite impactful. So you were blessed, I'm sure, in many ways.
Yes.
So yeah. So your latest book, Inspire, which by the way is an outstanding read, and I just want to say that on the cover, you know, you highlight this, but for those Dan Pink fans out there, and I hope most of you are, but Dan Pink says that this is the best book on leadership that he's read in years. And it truly is a fantastic read. I love your ability to tell very compelling stories that draw you in, but then also teach the lessons that go along with them. And speaking of powerful stories and lessons, right, you open the book talking about the difference between inspiring and infuriating leaders, and you do it through two big stories. So please share with us, for context purposes, share with us those stories and the lessons that come out of them so we all understand the difference and the continuum.
Yeah, so there's two stories about captains of vessels. One is a pilot of a plane, and the other is captain of a ship. And they both deal with gaping holes in their vessels, right? So in Southwest Airlines Flight 1380, the left engine explodes, which has all types of problematic complications, but it also tears the explosion, puts a hole in the cabin, and one of the passengers gets fatally sucked into that hole, but also leads to loss of cabin pressure, hydraulic lines getting cut, etc. And then, and that's in going from LaGuardia to Dallas in the United States. Then in the Mediterranean, there's a ship called the Costa Concordia that's being helmed by a guy named Francesco Schettino, and they get too close to shore, and some rocks deep below the surface tore a 150-foot hole into the vessel. And so what I highlight at the beginning of the book is how these two, they're both captains, they both have vessels, and they both have holes in their vessels, and how they responded dramatically differently, one in an inspiring way and one in an infuriating way. And what's really nice about these stories is they really highlight, I mentioned earlier that inspiring and infuriating leaders exist on this enduring continuum, and it's made up of these three universal factors. And these two stories really highlight those three universal factors. So one of the factors is what I call visionary. And what it means to be visionary is that we see the big picture, optimistic, values-based, meaningful big picture of the future, and we communicate that in a really simple and engaging way. And Schettino is incredibly visionary. She was visionary in understanding what was happening and what needed to happen. And she has this great quote. She says, "The plane wanted to descend, so I let it do what it wanted to do. I let it descend." But here's where she was really visionary, is she recognized that this vision couldn't just stay in her own head, right? As a leader, we need to communicate that vision. And she realized that for the passengers who were suddenly seeing a plane descending, in her mind, she knew that it was a planned and well-executed descent, but for someone in the back, it might seem like we're free-falling. We're going to our death. And so she went on the intercom and she said 10 words that just transformed the entire cabin from pure terror to hope and possibility. And those 10 words were, "We are not going down, we're going to Philly." And so she was signaling to them. She gave them the vision. She gave them, this is what is happening. She helped them make sense of their experience, gave it a sense of meaning and purpose, right? We talked about that already, the powerful human wish and need for a sense of meaning, purpose, and understanding. Now, Schettino, on the other hand, didn't see the big picture, right? He was small-minded. He was focused only on protecting his reputation. So it took him an hour to call the Coast Guard as the ship was starting to literally, begin the process of sinking. Once he got on with the Coast Guard, it took him 20 minutes to come clean. There was a electrical blackout. He was trying to imply the blackout caused the accident rather than vice versa. And, you could hear him say on audio, what should I say to this person? What should I say to that person? It was all about what story he should tell rather than what he needed to do to get done. So the first universal pathway is this idea of how we see the world and communicate the world, the visionariness. And, she had an inspiring vision and was able to communicate it. He didn't. The second universal factor is being what I call exemplar of desired behavior, and it's how we are in the world. And some of the core elements of that are being calm and courageous. Calm and courageous protector, kind of like my dad in the ocean I already talked about, right? But also being authentically passionate and being just super competent at your job. And there we see Schultz, a couple things. She was so calm. If you listen to the air traffic control conversation, she could be skiving her breakfast. She's like, we had an explosion. Part of the plane is missing. We're going to Philadelphia. This is what we need when we land. Just straightforward. Like here's what you need to pick up from the grocery store. And the second thing is when they landed, someone came inside the EMT to evaluate her, and the EMT said to her, "It said, how did you get through security?" She's like, "Wait, what?" He's like, "How did your nerves of steel not set off all the alarms? Like I'm measuring all of your biophysics and you're completely calm, like your heart rate's normal." And Schettino was frazzled and cowardly, right? Here's the thing about Schettino is at one point when he was talking to the Coast Guard, he was no longer on the ship. He was one of the lifeboats. But he claims it was all an accident, that he slipped and fell miraculously into the lifeboat. But the other crazy thing is, if you're sitting in the lifeboat with Schettino, you wouldn't know that he was the captain. He somehow, as his boat was sinking and dozens and dozens of people were going to lose their life, he managed to change out of his captain's uniform into civilian clothing so that he wouldn't be detected on this boat. Like the ultimate act of, the captain goes down with the ship, right? He did not do that. And one of the things we know is that this idea, this presence that we give, this exemplar desired behavior really satisfies a couple of fundamental needs. One of the fundamental needs is this need for, security and protection, right? Safety, right? And the other one is this idea of, authenticity and pure competence. And, she landed this plane unbelievably well despite, this lost engine and the hole in the plane. And then the third universal factor of inspiring versus infuriating others is what I call being a mentor. It's how we interact with others in the world. And Timmy Schultz, Captain Schultz, she, after the plane landed, she thought a lot about her passengers. So a couple different things. One is she purposely stopped the plane so the fire truck was on the same side as where the engine exploded in case there was a fire, right? She knew that some people might panic and jump on the wings, so she put the wings down so that someone could slide off and hurt themselves less. And then she went row by row, looked everyone in the eye and made sure that they were okay. And it's very funny because afterwards she said, "I find it ironic that the press talked more about what I did after the plane landed than the competence it took to land this crippled plane, but it shows how hungry people are for someone who connects to them. Schettino was selfish. It was all about himself, right? And even at the end, even in the courtroom, he declared, I shall not be responsible. Like, I'm not responsible for what happened, even though he was actually directly responsible because he was so close to the shore because he was trying to impress his mistress, a Moldovan dancer. And so you can really see, like, not taking any, responsibility. And, inspiring leaders share success and take on burden. And infuriating leaders steal success, me, but it's you when anything goes wrong. And so we can start to see, these three universal, dimensions of the inspiring versus infuriating, right? Seeing the big picture versus being small-minded, optimism versus pessimism, that's visionary, right? Being calm, courageous protectors versus anxious, cowardly, that's the exemplar. And then, empowering people, elevating people versus diminishing people and minimizing people, right, on the mentor side.
Amazing. So for everyone that's watching and listening right now, obviously, for anyone in a leadership position, and it does not require a title, right? Just being a leader. Yep. We want to be like a Schultz and not a Schettino, right? So we want to be an inspiring leader, not an infuriating leader. And I've got to share with you, Adam, that, as you were telling this story, especially as you were talking about Schultz, you were absolutely not exaggerating when you were saying how calm she was, and how you even wrote in your book on how calm she was. I listened to the recording, and it is as matter of fact as you just described. It really is phenomenal to think how someone can be to be in such control and confidence and be able to slow things down and articulate in a very modulated and calm way. Imagine the people around you, what that does for them as well. Now, share with us, because you talk about this, about how she very quickly built relationship, right? How she was able to, with her own crew, right? Because they had not flown together before. So speak to that for just a moment, and how important that is, building that type of relationship and looking for common ground.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I just want to say one more thing about her calmness. Like when she finally ends, she's like, I'm going to just stop right here. And then she says, thanks, everyone. As if like that was a good meeting we just had, I think that, sorry, what was the question again? Sorry, I wanted to finish that.
Yeah. So the crew that she was flying with,
right,
she had not flown with them before. Yeah. So the importance of finding common ground, building relationships.
The reason I got a little stumbled is because I went back to a memory. So in 1992, I was hired to be a research assistant at Harvard University for a professor named Richard Hackman, who had a joint position in psychology in the business school, so it was a very unique position. And he had a multi-million-dollar grant from NASA to study errors in cockpits. And one of the things that he discovered is something really, he studied teams all his life, is that there are more errors at the end of long-haul flights than there were at the beginning. Now, if you ask people, when do you think on a 15-hour flight there'll be more errors? People say, at the end. People are more tired. They're bored. They're impatient to get off the plane. All these reasons. But most of the time when you get into a cockpit, you've never met the people before. And so you don't know actually how to coordinate your behavior. And so over time, you start to learn people's rhythms and you start becoming a team. Now, one of the things that we can do is we can facilitate that team process. And that's exactly what Tammy Jo Schultz did. So, part of it was the benefit of randomness, which is they just happened to have a little bit extra time. They all got on board. So, the flight attendants maybe coming from other flights got there a little bit earlier than they normally would. And they had about 20 minutes before they were going to get on the plane, the passengers. And so they just started talking. And one of the things, and this is an example of a leader, she brought up a dilemma that she was facing, which is her daughter or son, I'm not sure, but one of her children was graduating from high school. And she was like, what am I going to get them for a graduation present? And then the first officer, Darren Ellisher, said, I have a child graduating high school too. I've been thinking the same thing. And so they started talking about it. And then she mentioned that she actually thought about getting her daughter a particular Bible. And then one of the flight attendants had that same Bible. And she really liked it because she could journal in it. And then she said, I'm doing this study of Psalms. And then a different flight attendant's like, I'm doing a study of Psalms. And so, I think it's, she was willing to ask questions, but also reveal something about herself that allowed people to make that connection. And so she said she thought that it was a critical component of them working effectively because there's just that little bit of, I know this person and they know me and we can trust each other. And I think that was such an incredibly powerful instance of that.
It truly is. So for all of us looking for that commonality, right, being able to build relationships and asking good questions, right? It's, if we're going to move into any type of project, if we're in a leadership capacity, if we don't have relationships, we don't have anything. We need those relationships, right? That is how we accomplish good things together. So and by the way, before we move off of these three areas, because they're foundational to the rest of the book, right? But you also created a VIM diagram, right? Visionary, exemplar, and mentor, the diagram around a inspiring leader. So I love how you came up with that because it's a
Yes.
great visual and a great explanation for the balance of the book. Now, I want to make sure that we are talking about the leader amplification effect. We touched on it very briefly as we were
Yep.
talking at the beginning of the conversation, but share with us what that is and give a personal example, if
Yep.
you will, from your own life of where that effect comes into practice and the impact that it had on you personally, and
Yep.
then most importantly, what can we do about it?
Yeah. So the leader amplification effect is a term that I coined, and it basically says that when we're in a position of leadership, because we have power and authority, because people look up to us, we're essentially on a stage and people are watching us, they're paying attention to us. And one of the things that we know from psychology, at the core, foundational, neuropsychological, cognitive, universal law is that anything that we pay attention to is going to send a stronger signal and it's going to have a deeper impact, right? So if we pay attention to someone, if they send a positive signal, that's going to be even more positive, and we're going to have a stronger, more intensified reaction to it. And so this can be good, bad. It can be verbal, nonverbal. And I'll give two very quick examples. But one is in 1993, I started my PhD at Princeton University, and my first class was a guy named Danny Kahneman, who would be he's only the psychologist to ever win the Nobel Prize in economics. There's 11, it was literally the first class I'd ever taken as a PhD student. There was 10 other students, so 11 of us in total. And I was nervous, right? Because you're like, okay, I want to prove that I belong, And so at some point in this 3-hour class, I saw an opportunity to say something that I thought was insightful. I still remember today the 4 things Danny did. He crossed his arms, he shook his head, he scrunched up his face, and he said, "That's not right at all." And, for Danny, it was an offhand comment. He just didn't agree with the comment, and he kind of moved on, and the rest of the class moved on. But, I was frozen in place. Like those words just reverberated inside of me, right? It felt like humiliating criticism, and it would take me weeks to speak again. But at the same time, about 6 weeks into the class, I was walking down the hallway, and I see Danny Kahneman, and he's sort of walking, and he kind of notices me, and then over his shoulder, he kind of offhandedly calls back to me. He's like, "Hey, Adam, I love reading your reflection papers. You're a great writer." And they turned the corner, and I was filled with such an intense form of joy. I literally just started skipping down the hallway, and I literally ran to call my girlfriend at the time to tell her, like, Danny Kahneman just said he really loves my writing, And what's amazing about that is they're two incredibly different situations, two very different comments, but they actually represent the same phenomenon, which is the leader amplification effect. Because of his status, because of his authority, right? This, what he thought was a very straightforward, criticism became humiliating, right? But then this offhand compliment became glorious praise, as I like to call it. He wouldn't even remember the comments a day later, probably. You'd say, "Oh," if I went to him and said, "Thank you so much for the compliment," he'd probably like, "Wait, what compliment?" It didn't even faze him, right? And so that's one of the things that the leader amplification effect, we might not even be aware of it. My favorite example of this, and I'll tell you one other example too, which I think is really, really important, is Barry Salzberg became the CEO of Global Deloitte with almost 500,000 employees around the world. And about 6 months in, he just had this realization that there's bananas at every meeting. And he's like, "I've been at Deloitte for 30 years. A banana is an important symbol of Deloitte that I missed. Is someone really important, really love bananas?" So he went up to his assistant and he said, "Hey, why do we have bananas at every meeting?" And she said, "Because you love bananas." He's like, "Wait, what? I don't love bananas." Apparently what happened is the very first meeting he attended to as the CEO of Deloitte, his assistant was paying very close attention, right? So she wants to know, what are his preferences? And I guess he picked up a banana with just a touch of enthusiasm. He didn't even say a word. It's all nonverbal. And she's like, Barry Solberg loves bananas. I saw him smile. I'm going to have bananas at every meeting. And so I call it, Barry's Banana Adventures because this, it wasn't even an offhand comment. It was just an offhand glance, that had this huge, powerful impact. But my favorite example that I like to give is a simple phrase that if you heard it from someone, it always gives you a little bit of pause. So imagine you wake up in the morning and your friend says, hey, Adam, call me when you're up. I need to talk to you. You might think, are they okay? Is it about me? I'm a little worried, but we'll see. But then if you wake up in the morning and your boss says, hey, Adam, I need to talk to you. Come by my office, at 2 p.m. Then you'd, totally start to panic, right? Because, oh my God, what's going on? And so many people have told me stories of that. But I discovered it when, I was a assistant professor. And so I love the assistant professor because they have less power than the tenured faculty who will vote on your promotion, but you have more power than the lowly doctoral students, right, who depend on you for resources and recommendation letters. And so one day, 9 a.m., the elevator doors open up. I see Gail Berger, a doctoral student. I say, hey, Gail, come by my office at 3 p.m. I need to talk to you. So 6 hours later, Gail shows up and she's crouched down. She looks really apprehensive, a little confused, because I just wanted to tell her, go over some research materials she sent me. And I still remember to this day what Gail did is she slammed her fist on the table and said, never do that to me again. I was like, oh my God, do what? And she said, never tell me you want to meet with me without telling me why. She's like, do you know how much work I got done the last hour? 6 hours, 0. Is Adam mad at me? Is someone else mad at me? Am I going to lose something? And at first I thought, okay, Gail's neurotic. Gail is a little bit neurotic. But the next day, the chair of my department, the most powerful person in my department, sent me a note that said, hey, Adam, come by my office at 3 p.m. And I freaked out and I came and crouched out, in that. And so one of the things, there's two things I think we should note about the leader amplification effect. The first is that our words are going to have a huge impact. And so one of the things I tell people is when you are in a position of leadership where people look up to you, or people care about your opinion. So it's like in a dating relationship, it's the same thing, right? Everything you say and do is going to be scrutinized, it's going to be amplified, and your reactions other people's reactions are going to be intensified. And so you are either going to inspire, create that wellspring of hope and possibility, or you're going to infuriate and create that seething cauldron of rage and resentment, and neutrality isn't an option. So we have to become more aware of how we're impacting people. And we can talk about, as a parent, parent amplification effect, I call it, the big impact we have as parents on our kids. And so that gives us a lot of insight. The first thing it says is, maybe we hold our critical tongue and say it in a way that's easily digestible to the other person, or we don't do it publicly, right? When it's even more humiliating. Maybe we do what Gail told me to do and we tell people why we need to talk to them. And I thought a lot about that because if I had said to Gail, hey, Gail, come by my office at 3 p.m. I want to go over your research materials. It's literally the same number of words as what I said to her, right? So it wouldn't have cost me a single word. But I had to recognize that Gail didn't know it wasn't scary. And I have this great story to tell in the book. There's a president of a sovereign wealth fund in Asia who would do this all the time to people. He'd say that. And I did a consulting thing for them. And so the senior leaders said to this president, they're like, could you just tell us why you need to meet with us? Like, what Adam talked about. And you know what he said? No, I don't have time to tell you. So they had a negotiation and they finally said, okay, would you do anything to calm our frazzled nerves? And he said, okay, I will put in 2 characters into my email or text if it's not scary, a colon and a closed parentheses, a smiley face. And I saw one of the executives 2 years later and she's like, oh my God, it's amazing. You get the smiley face, like, phew. And if you don't get the smiley face, you just run as fast as you can, right? It's a big deal. And so it teaches us to give people more context. Exactly what Tammy Jo Schultz did. We're not going down, we're going to Philly, right? People couldn't see inside her mind, right? And so in some ways, the I need to talk to you is the same thing as a descending plane. And then the third thing is, but we can leverage this, right? Danny Kahneman's compliment, I like to say it nourishes me 30 years later. right? This, this person that saw in you the seed of potential, like you said, before you got into the Gifted and Talented program, right? Transformed your life. And so the other thing is we can be, more intentional about reaching out to people and letting them know, like you said, the positive things that they had done. And sometimes in person, sometimes in writing, as we've already discussed, but we can leverage that. And then we can even amplify our amplifications by letting a person's boss know how well they did. Like what my mom.
Yeah, this is like what your mom did. Exactly. This is, first of all, it's so relatable and so powerful at the same time. And as you're sharing this, I'm going back in my own memory bank of all the times that I just absolutely blew it, and the times when I feel like I did things well, right? Where I did make a comment, where I did amplify something that I saw, which made a meaningful difference. And so let me ask you this: in the example that you gave with Gail, yep. Was it the reason that you just said, "Hey, come see me later today," whatever that comment was, without any more context around it? Was it purely an awareness?
Yeah, I think it's called the curse of knowledge. Like in my mind,
okay.
in my mind, like there's no reason for me to think that it'd be scary to her because I knew in my mind it wasn't scary, right? So It never even occurred to me that this, like, I wasn't taking her perspective, right? And perspective taking is this key theme throughout the book, right? It's funny. At one point in the book, the first chapter was just called perspective taking, and then it changed because I realized it was really something that was sort of embedded throughout all the different processes, that can happen. But I want to come back to one other thing about the leader amplification effect, which is that there is another insidious consequence of it, which is something I call the leader silencing effect. And so, when we're in, like Danny Kahneman, his criticism, like it shut me down, right? It humiliated me. And it probably shut other people down in the room from like, okay, I better be darn sure that Danny's going to like my comment before I say it. And so one of the big problems that we know from research that the single best way to make a great decision, a wise decision, is to have as much information on the table as possible. But if people are afraid to share their perspective, we're going to have limited information and then we're going to make subpar decisions. So one of the biggest themes and one of the chapters in the book is called Inspiring Wise Decisions. And it's really about, as a leader, understanding the leader amplification effect, right? And the fact that our authority makes speaking up risky for people because they're so afraid of having that feeling of being, humiliated and criticized, is that we have to find ways both through our own behavior, but also through the way we design meetings to help people feel more comfortable speaking up. And so in that case, we're trying to really manage the leader amplification effect so it doesn't produce the leader silencing effect. And we end up with impoverished information and therefore collective disasters.
Yes, I've experienced both of those. And it kind of speaks to, Adam, it speaks to psychological safety, right? Yeah. Creating a culture of openness, creating a culture of being able to speak up where your voice matters without the ramifications, without shutting somebody down. Because the moment we do that, to your point, we lose the opportunity to have the best ideas, iteration, innovation, and just having people who feel good about what they're doing, contributing and wanting to become their best. So great points on that.
Can I just tell you one quick study that really please. Just, I've published, probably 300 scientific articles in my life. And so all of this stuff, and I describe a lot of the studies, but this is one I think that really highlights this, is that we analyzed 100 years of Himalayan climbing data. Right. And so in this one of my favorite papers we did, and we know everything about the expeditions. We know what route they took, if they had rope and oxygen and Sherpas and whatever. And we found this really amazing finding, which is that if the expedition came from a country that was more hierarchical, and when a country is more hierarchical, it's even more risky for people with less power to speak up, they were more likely to have an expedition where someone died on the mountain. Now, our theory is that because of they come from a country that's more hierarchical, people feel less comfortable speaking up. So they're like, let's go this way. And some people are like, I I don't think that's a good way, but I'm not going to challenge the leader, right? Because the leader, is so powerful. And one of the ways that we showed that it was a team phenomenon and not a country phenomenon, like people from this country are bad climbers, is there was no correlation or prediction of fatalities for solo climbers. So solo climbers weren't more likely to die if they came from a hierarchical country. It was only the teams that were more likely to die if they came from a hierarchical country. So there's something about the team dynamic. And, again, and I like to say, I always say, get all the information on the table. In this case, get all the information on the snow-covered mountain. But what's remarkable, right, is that hierarchy and this leader silencing effect can be so powerful that we don't even share information that could save our own life, right? That's how risky it is to speak up. And so it's just a reminder. And, in the book, I go through lots of different ways that we can do both as an individual, but also as a way we design our meetings to increase the probability that someone feels comfortable speaking up. And I'll just give you just one really quick example. It's like something simple as where you sit and when you speak. Right? If you're the leader and you speak first, everyone's just going to give you whatever they think you want to hear, right? But if you really want to hear people's perspectives, speak last. Similarly, like if you sit at the head of the table, you're reinforcing your authority, your power, your intimidation. If you let someone else sit at the head of the table, you're empowering them. And I had a doctoral student who really had a hard time expressing themselves and that they were so smart. And one day I literally said, why don't we switch seats? You sit in this seat, the professor's seat. I'll sit in that student seat over there. And I like to say he became like Muhammad Ali of research ideas, right? It was something just like sometimes it's just changing where you sit could make a huge difference in helping someone feel more comfortable speaking up.
That is absolutely fascinating. And, I can tell just listening to you how excited you get about the research itself.
Yes.
That's got to be an area that you absolutely light up. And I wanted to ask you just very briefly, because I know we're short on time here, but you co-authored a research paper that was recently published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology called The Vicious Cycle of Status Insecurity. And you write about this in Inspire, but could you very briefly just share with us a little bit about your research findings? This is fascinating.
Yeah, I'll just start off by saying that if you do surveys of people and organizations about things they find infuriating, one of the most infuriating things that anyone finds in an organization is someone stealing their idea. So that's like a leader or a peer, like, you come up with this great idea and someone else gets credit for it. Or you feel like you don't get enough credit for your contributions, right? And so that's a really infuriating place to be. And one of the things that we looked at was what happens when leaders are feeling insecure about their own standing. Maybe, and insecurity comes in has lots of different roots. Sometimes it's because we are new to experience and feel like we don't have, the knowledge or competence. Sometimes it's because we failed in the past. Sometimes it's because other people are set up for success because they have more resources than us. Sometimes it's because the stakes are incredibly high. It's just a high pressure situation. And what we found is whenever someone felt concerned about their status, their standing, whether other people respected them, it made them, I would call them status monsters in a sense that they are, status misers. They wanted to claim credit. And in their mind, they had this distorted view of the world. And the rule was that status is zero sum. If I say how great Jay is, then they're going to give Jay status. They're going to take it away from me. But here's the crazy thing. So we showed in lots of different cool studies with lots of different paradigms, probably one of my favorite papers ever. We even showed it on the TV show Survivor, right? That when people are feeling insecure about their status, they're less likely to acknowledge other people spontaneously. Like, here's one of my favorite examples. We made people feel insecure. They said, think about time at work when you felt insecure about, your standing or you felt secure. And then we said, hey, you just got promoted at work, and your mentor and your team members are so supportive. Share whatever you want on, LinkedIn or Twitter, like just write a post. And all we did was code. Did they acknowledge other people? Did they say, I did it! I got this new great promotion. I feel so good. Or they say, oh my God, I got this promotion and I couldn't have done it without my mentor and my teammates. And we found is that when they just simply recalled a time when they felt insecure, they were less likely to acknowledge others. But they have it wrong, because we show in later studies that if I compliment you, not only do you get more status, but I also get more status. And I call it expanding the status pie, right, in that process. And I want to come back to something we talked about at the very beginning, because I think this kind of puts a bow on everything that we've talked about, which is, I talked about my twin brother. And that he was really good at standardized tests and I wasn't, but I was really good at communicating with another person. And one of the ways that as a leader, we can expand the status pie is we can recognize the wide variety of ways that people contribute to the team, right? Different people contribute different ways. And I'll give a profound example from my parents, which is my mom was an incredible researcher. She was a professor at UNC Chapel Hill. She published a paper at the age of 79, right? She was the only endowed chaired professor in her department. My dad, after he got full, he never published another paper in his life. But he was an incredible administrator. He was chair for 12 years of the psychology department. You mentioned all these great things that people said about my dad, And so that gave me an appreciation that there's lots of different ways that faculty contribute to a university. We often only highlight my moms of the world, the people who are the great researchers, but a university wouldn't survive without my dads of the world, with the people who were great administrators or great teachers or generous teachers who shared their resources with others. And so another way that we can be inspiring, but also get the best out of people is when we expand the status pie by recognizing the different ways that people contribute.
Wow. Beautifully said. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. So I've got one ask for you. I would love it if you would give all of us, including me, a challenge. What is one thing that you would challenge us to do starting immediately?
I think one of the things is I mentioned this, president of this bank who sent out a message every day to one of his, 1,400 employees. And I think just do what you said already. You said every day I try to find one person that I can say, great job, or thanks so much for what you did. And I think if you just make that into, one of the things we know about design thinking is that when we create structures, we're more likely to do something, right? So, people are more likely to work out if they do it at the same time every day, right? So, just every day over your cup of coffee, or you could do it over your glass of wine at night, whatever your cup of tea in the afternoon, just spend 3 minutes, doing that. If you do that, you're going to brighten their day and they're going to brighten your day. And I think that's one of the biggest ones. The second final thing, because I'm greedy and want to give you two different things, is, you mentioned the power of reflections.
Yes.
And I think that one of the most important things we can do is we can reflect on our own experiences. And we can just ask ourselves, have I been the best version of myself? Have I been inspiring? But be honest, were there times when I was infuriating? What was the cause of that? Could I reduce that? Could I create a different habit? So maybe you realize, I was infuriating 3 times last week and it was because I was hungry every time. Okay, I got to do a better job of having that protein bar with me. Or when I don't get enough sleep, I'm an infuriating ogre. Okay, I got to find a way to get more sleep, right? And so I got to build that into my schedule. Or sometimes it's, practicing meditation so you become able to be more calm in situations. Whatever it is, but to get there, you got to start with reflection.
2 fantastic challenges. Thank you for that. And I'm just going to share my words, and I hope all of you that are watching and listening are going to say the same thing. Challenge accepted, and then start doing the work, right? I love that. And Adam, thank you so very much. What a phenomenal conversation. I truly appreciate you bringing your true authentic self, the excitement around your research, and sharing so many great insights with all of us. You're definitely a game changer. Thank you very much, and I'm grateful for you.
Oh, I'm grateful too. Thanks for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And for all of you, I want to thank you so very much for watching and for listening. And I do have a quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review? Let us know what you thought about this particular episode with Adam Galinsky. Do that on Apple Podcasts. That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing guests just like Adam. And to listen to more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button. And my friends, until next time, keep learning and growing. Do yourself a favor. Go out, matter of fact, run out and buy a copy of Inspire. And please apply the lessons you learn. And we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.